Welcome everyone to part two, Cyber Talk with Nikolai, and today we continue our discussion on making sense out of compliance with Karina Klever, with Clever Compliance. You do all those things that you mentioned, and let's say you gather evidence, and from your perspective, what is your favorite framework you can get the most bang for the buck if organization follows it? And then auditors come in because, again, one thing that I've seen with auditors, it's getting them on the same page in the conversation. So when they read framework, they have their level of understanding what they're looking for. When somebody within an organization reads the same framework, they have slightly different interpretation what should control means. And then when conversations start happening between auditors and the organizations, that's where originally flags spark starts flying because the interpretation is different between two entities, and at times they cannot agree which one is correct, and then the organization goes and does based on what organization think is right, and then auditors come in and they try to find whatever they think they're looking for when organization provides slightly different interpretation of the same control that they're asking. So have you what would you recommend the best approach to say, well, if you're dealing with auditors, here's how to get them on the same page when you've done a lot of work and help them to understand how you come in and how you go about all those controls that they're looking for to make sure that there are no surprises or no sort of like people rolling grenades in the middle of the room and then nobody has a clue how to answer all those questions.
So, so there's a few different questions in your question. So the first one I'm going to address is what's the best framework. So unfortunately, I'm going to say it depends. It depends on a few different things. It depends on your industry, on your level of maturity, on your locations, the silos that you may have inside your company. The way that governance is looked at is if your company is mature enough to include HR in governance, let's say they give you the triggers for onboarding and offboarding, and they also include contractors. I'm going to throw this one out there. I'm seeing a lot of failures right now for non-employee workers that bypass the onboarding and the offboarding process because a hiring manager brings the contractor on directly. And then when the money's out and the contractor's gone, they just forget to submit the termination ticket. So, your logical physical access needs to be granted based on your title, never as a replication of someone else's access. And I actually have a separate story for that. So, is your finance group involved in your overall GRC? How really is your legal group involved in your GRC, especially as it relates to the vendors? Because, when you bring on a firm to do work for you, what's the commitment for breach notifications? Many times there isn't one, right? What's the commitment for data retention and data handling? What's the commitment for their subservice organizations? Have you been advised that your data might go somewhere else? And are you okay with that, right? So all of these decisions are very contractual, and it goes beyond when are you paying us? And the term is 36 months, and you have to give us 90 days before you terminate. So some of those legalese things need to also be considered as part of an overall GRC program. It's not just an IT. Now, SOC 2s have a weakness, and SOC 2's weaknesses are that you do not, subservice organizations are excluded from most SOC 2s. So based on AICPA trust principles, if you choose to go down a path of a SOC 2 now, I'm going to say that you've hired that SOC 2 auditor. Your company has hired that SOC 2 auditor, which means that they're working for you, essentially, right? So sure, you want them to be thorough, but they're still following the COSO framework. So what you need to be cognizant of if you choose to go down a SOC 2 is that there's still going to be a gap for understanding that vendor management is kind of excluded from from the process. Sure, you can have a vendor management policy, and sure, you can go do your assessments on vendor management, probably a checkbox exercise, but get in the habit of asking those really, really tough questions when you accept a SOC 2 from a vendor, as an example. But when you're hiring somebody to do a SOC 2 for you, you may even want to ask them their advice on how to better handle vendors. If you're going to go ISO, globally recognized, right? A lot more of a fluid framework. NIST V2 was reintroduced because of that govern band in the middle, right? So you can have all of these operational competencies in place. Again, it's cybersecurity framework, right? So now, again, your scope is to IT. It doesn't include necessarily all of the other organizations in your company that need to participate in this GRC program as a whole. Your entire governance program needs to be reflective of your company. And the other caution I'm seeing right now while I'm on that topic is your Securities Exchange Commission breach notification. So everybody's stuck on this word material, and of course everybody wants to fight, the filing because they're deeming it immaterial. And okay, that's fine. That's kind of a separate conversation. My concern is that we're seeing a lot of people who do not have the business continuity inside their own company to actually trace from the moment of the event to the moment of the disclosure, because there are many times several departments involved in this. There are, yes, you have IT, you have incident management, you have a scan, a test that you've ran, an alert that you've received, a threshold that's been met. Yes, you have all of these things from an incident management perspective. But then what happens, right? You've got a very limited amount of time to do that disclosure. So now you're tracing through, is legal involved? Who called the insurance company? Are we calling the FBI? Somebody calling CISA, right? Is HR involved? Is this a contractor? Is this a vendor? Do we have to pull up our legal contract? Where's the contract? Who's got the contract? Did we get a hold of legal? Is the CFO involved? Because if we're disclosing something, they have to basically okay the fact that we're making this disclosure. So from the moment of inception to the moment of disclosure, there's so many parties that are involved that it becomes a loss, and it becomes kind of muted. And because of that, some engineers that I know pick up the phone and call SEC, the Securities Exchange Commission, say, hey, we just had a breach. So you kind of want to avoid that too, right? Because it hasn't been vetted. It hasn't gone through your process. Where's your communications department? Where's your CAN template to make a notice out to the public? So my advice on this is drill, 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 drill. And again, common sense, right? We want to drill that workflow, but we don't want to be so busy with those 20,000 row compliance checkbox exercises and focused on that we're forgetting how to actually drill on this critical area. So back to your original question of which is the best framework. It depends, right? So frameworks, again, they're made for our guidance. ISOs are globally recognized. SOC 2 is more of a US thing. Remember that you've hired the auditor to do the SOC 2. They need to be complement. One of my favorite frameworks is actually COBIT. I've been using COBIT for 20 years. They're an ISACA framework. And there are a lot of other frameworks. You use HITRUST for HIPAA. The important thing to focus in on is, of course, the regulatory requirements. And then the framework becomes a recommendation on how to implement the regulatory requirements that apply to you. If the auditor comes in and starts picking, have the conversation to understand whether or not you're doing enough to actually provide for them the evidence that would make them understand that you've got it handled. I find a lot of picking happens that, they just want to keep pushing the envelope because they have not gotten a sense that you've got your operations under control. You've got your controls well defined. You're measuring your risks. You're gathering passive evidence, you're focused on continual improvement, you're keeping a tab on all of the regulations and frameworks that changes, you're adopting them into your published frameworks, into your published documents, and updating your controls accordingly, and that your scope of controls is sufficient. Systems, vendors, and humans. Whether your one department is a building full in Chicago, or whether it's three guys down the hallway, those groups that perform the functions need to be providing constant evidence that the controls that you've established for their functional operations are being adhered to.
Thank Karina for that. So definitely very enlightening. While you were talking, one question came up to my mind, and I'd like to ask you and what you see. So organizations are different type of organizations. Some of them just starting their journey in compliance. Some of them been established and they pretty much know what they need to do. They have many auditors coming, visiting them, and they pretty much have all their ducks in a row and have very little finding. But let's say when organizations are embarking on this journeys, like yes, we have company, IT, we have things to do. Sooner or later, somebody's going to come knocking on our doors and asking all those questions. What would you say the best approach for them to start with? And I won't say the best compliance, but the more compliance with that will make more sense to pick, and maybe kind of excluding financial organizations because they already have their work cut out with FDIC regulations and they cannot escape. So once you step on that road that you're going to provide financial services to anyone, you have to comply with whatever has been told. But other organizations, like you mentioned, you have ISO 27001, SOC 2, and a few others. You can pick NIST 853, or you can start with NIST CSF to say, here's what I want to go. But what would you recommend their approach be to say, well, here is a meaningful path that organization can take to get from point A to point B and demonstrate compliance and then expand, just like you mentioned, the scope of controls and add additional things once you build the muscle.
So when I go to clients, I actually recommend to them to do a marriage from the top down and the bottom up, right? So here's what I mean by that. You can say, NIST, ISO, you can pick one, high trust, you can pick any of those from the top down, but marry that with the bottom up, your actual real functional or operations, and take those published documents and at the bottom have reference to the controls that you're satisfying in the regulation that you have to adhere by, and the framework that you've chosen to select, the framework that you've selected to help you put forth this best practice operations in your enterprise. Focus on the basics. No one knows where their data is. Data classification. I started IT in April 1989, and we had punch cards, right? We mounted tapes. We had a 3800 that was 1 gig. We thought the 1 gig, we were cutting edge, the most amazing, technologically forward-thinking company in the world, right? It was the size of 12 refrigerators, but it held 1 gig. And we had to make really, really hard decisions about what data do we want to keep? What's really important data? Is it employee data? Is it client data? Is it financial data? All important things. But we had to pick. And so right now, because we're hoarding data, no one is picking which data to keep. They don't have data classification. They treat all data flat. And now you have the scenario of publicly available data that should be purged in 2 weeks goes and gets encrypted. Why are you encrypting it? Like, why are you storing it? It's publicly available data. So the first thing I always recommend is take a really hard look at your data classification. Data classification needs to include the types of data that you have in your company. And then you need to go to the NIST basics. Who's transporting it? Who's storing it? Who's processing it? the answer to one of these three, or maybe all of these three, may be a vendor. Now, again, you're associated to that vendor management policy. Start asking those hard questions from your vendors. So now you have order of sequence, data classification, vendor management, security controls, perimeter and internal. Nobody turns on their DLP. Like I don't know why, right? I mean, there's so much functionality out there. DLP doesn't get turned on. Now you start looking at your MSPs and your platforms that you have to support that data security and your perimeter securities, right? Now you get into incident management policy, change management policy, security awareness policy. You get into all of these core functional policies that exist and are called for in every regulation framework you're ever going to work with, period. They're all there. Every single regulation and framework, I don't remember seeing one that doesn't say you should control your changes. I have not seen a regulation or framework that doesn't say you need to have incident management. You need to have incident management. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to basically identify the core competency areas that exist in all regulations and frameworks. And this is where that marriage bottom up and then the top bottom comes in, because at some point when you've selected that best practice, you're now going to be able to say, okay, here are the controls in my particular policy. Here's how I execute on them, gather that evidence, know what's failing, and then you change it. Make a decision, document it. It's not the end of the world. It's not written in stone. It doesn't work for a year because your risk registry keeps going up or you have way too many exceptions on that policy. Change it. You're supposed to sit down once a year and look at all of your documentation and determine whether or not it's actually working the right way. Make a change and then try a net new control or a new process. So they all work. All of the regulations work for that industry, and all of the frameworks work for all industries. Banking, you got to be careful with people's data. I am unfortunately right now in the middle of a vendor assessment that is just tragic because there's so many failure points along the way with my client who is using this vendor in a financial organization where I'm literally sitting here and just going, this can't be real. Who signed off on this? Who is not asking questions of how you're treating my financial information? Same tragedy with healthcare, right? Same scenario of, I actually just did a vendor assessment a few weeks ago that 4 embedded links removed off the privacy policy. It basically says, if you download our app on your phone and you look at your health information on your phone through the app we've provided for you, we're not accountable for your PHI because HIPAA's out the door, since we really can't validate the API for that platform and that tool that renders you your data. So us as consumers, we think, okay, my medical provider gave me this app and I can just go ahead and get all my data on it. Yeah, there's no guarantee that any of that data is secure. They've actually done a carve-out exclusion for HIPAA specifically because of that API, and APIs are everywhere now, right? So you have to look at the APIs as well as part of those system functions. So for and children, oh my goodness, right? The children, the exclusions that we have in consumer privacy and the COPA laws. Why are we all putting up pictures of our kids online and videos of our kids online and their voices? I mean, we're creating a digital signature for our children, and they haven't even opted into that. They haven't had the chance to have a decision be voiced that says, hey, don't put that picture of me slamming into a wall online. Maybe I don't want anybody to know that I have a food allergy or that my best friend's name is Susie or something else about me. why are we relinquishing all of this information about our children and creating for them an identity that they might not even agree to when they turn into adulthood? So we have to all be cognizant of that. So any data, it comes down to the data. That's our golden egg, right? What business are we in, and what data is most valuable to us, and how are we protecting that data? I have a friend, actually, I did another webinar with. He says, nobody robs a bank to go steal the pens. But because we're taking the pens and we're putting the pens in the vault where we're putting the money, why would we do that? Because that's not really what people are interested in. So,
Yeah, that's definitely true. And thank you, Karina, for that. So one thing that I'd like to ask, and usually people learn a lot from bad experiences. What was your worst experience in compliance to overcome and help organizations or they're being part of organization, get them where they need to go? Because usually you learn a lot from mistakes of others, or especially when you try to help them. Because best everyone kind of clean windows, but when everything is broken and put things together, that's when you learn a lot how things work together and how to get them from point A to point B. And especially when you land in an organization and there is a laundry list of findings from previous auditor that all the things are broken, and now everyone is kind of looking, it's like, how do we get from where we are right now to actually operate and continue in business? Because in some cases, like in financial services, they have the power to shut down the business until you resolve all your findings and then make it whole, because they don't want to have people putting money and their trust into organizations that are essentially mistrusted at the moment.
so I'm going to say the consistent hardest thing is internal. Uh, Usually, the people who are in decision making capacities do not want to make a decision. They don't want to be held to that because most of the time they're trying to be accommodating to other leaders in the company. So, I'm going to give you one example. Retail, we were standing up GDPR. I'm in Chicago, a huge conference room, sitting in the middle of a very big board table. On one hand, I have HR, and on the other hand, I have IT. And so, how this came to be was 4 months prior to this meeting, I had posed the question, hey, what are we going to do about LOA, leave of absence? So, uh, I broke my foot last year, and had I been someone's employee, I would have gone on disability, and I would have probably been a salaried employee, and I would have probably checked email every single day. So meanwhile, I'm collecting a salary, I'm collecting my disability payments, and my salary gets suspended. But then when I come back to the office, I say, hey, I checked email every single day. So I was technically working and you owe me back pay. And this is happening right now, and employees are winning. And so my question was, should we do a suspension of access when somebody goes on LOA? And I'd asked the CTO, and he said, well, I'm good to do the suspension, but I need to hear it from HR. And so I go to the chief human resources person. Do you want to send, are you okay with this? Should this be our policy? Should we suspend access when someone's on LOA? Oh, I think access suspension is a great idea, but I don't want to give IT more work. Okay. So you go back to the CTO. Hey, CTO, HR said they're fine to send you these triggers, but they're concerned about your workload. Oh, okay. Well, you can go back and tell the chief risk person that we're okay to assume the workload, but we have to work out some logistics on when you're going to send us this, and like, what are the time parameters? Is it really everything? And this went on for 4 months, 4 months, 4 months, back and forth, and emails and meetings and emails and meetings. And the truth was, neither one of them wanted to volunteer the other guy for something that maybe they didn't want to be doing, or maybe they weren't on the same page. So now we fast forward back to this boardroom in Chicago, and it was resolved in 10 minutes. 10 minutes. And the decision was made. We got executables to update policies, the employee policies, the technical policies, the actual knowledge bases that we were using to do the suspensions, the processes between the two departments. Oh, it was supposed to be a 6-week LOA, but it turned out to be an 8-week LOA. So how do we do these, right? Different triggers. So many of the problems I find are really not external. They're not forced on us. We are creating them because we have siloed environments. We're leery of volunteering other people for work. We won't most of the time. And we just want to be polite. And so we don't want to volunteer other people and assume that they will do work for us. We kind of create these silos. And because of that, overall governance for the entire company starts crumbling.
Yeah, that was interesting. Yeah, definitely. I can feel it that a lot of things when people don't really want to make decisions or volunteer anyone can go still not getting resolved. And when problem strikes, everyone is pointing fingers like, hey, it should have been you doing this, or you should have been saying me this. Yeah, no, I understand. So before we coming up to an hour, and before we break, usually I like to ask our guests to share some funny story from your experience with the audience. If you have anything to lighten the mood and to leave it on a high note, so to speak.
The closing thought that I have for all of this is a bit of a visual for folks, right? So if you are making dinner tonight and if you have 12 things on your recipe list uh, to make tonight's dinner, and it's going to be delicious, and you go over to the grocery store and you end up buying one of every single thing that they have at the grocery store. You buy one of every vegetable, one of every fruit, one of every frozen item, one of every box of package, one of every can, one of every bread, one of every Danish, one of every shampoo, whatever they have at the store, one of every pet food, even if you don't have pets. So you buy one of every single thing that they have at the grocery store and you haul it home only to get to those 12 things on your grocery list, on your list for tonight's recipe. And we are essentially doing that every day in GRC. We're bringing the entire grocery store home, which creates its own set of difficulties, right? It creates how, God, this the fruits and vegetables are going to spoil. Do I eat them all right now? Like, what do I do with them? Do I cook them? Do I can them? Right? Oh, I don't have enough room in the freezer. I should go get another freezer so that I can put all of the frozen things in there. I might never even like them. I have shellfish allergies. I just have a bag of frozen shrimp over there. I had to buy one of each thing at the grocery store. So I guess now I have shrimp, but I can't really eat it. I don't have pets, but now I have pet food. I don't like this shampoo, but now I have a bottle. So we have to pull ourselves out of this drowning that we've created for ourselves with these check boxes, with these spreadsheets. We have to appropriate the controls that are really applicable to us. And when you go to the store, don't buy everything in the grocery store. Just buy the things on your list. And right now, we're unable to do that because we're so fixated on buying every single item at the grocery store. And what a waste. What a waste of resources, IT resources, people, process, technology, right? A waste of all of those three resources: your humans, your providers of service, the technology capabilities you have. You go and you buy 78 tools for your IT department. Your folks are sitting there swivel chair with 20 different admin accounts and all of these tools. Nothing's getting done. Look at the number of influences that you're giving your team and ask, why am I having them work from all of these different platforms? Because more tools doesn't necessarily mean a better service, because now you've just introduced more opportunities for failure. So it's about kind of centering back on your own business and focusing on what's critical to you in your data and how you're controlling that data and how you're putting controls in place to help you execute on those controls.
Very well done, Karina. Thank you for sharing this one and for closing. So definitely great experience and great conversations. Appreciate you coming on, and to the audience, thank you for staying with us and listening. Sharing is caring, and together we can defend and protect ourselves more. So stay tuned for our next episode, and thank you.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. For more information about these topics or IS Squared, please go to www.issquaredinc.com.